if you'd like to do that, Tara, thank you so much. So this panel came together with the idea to move forward some of the interest we have in terms of remixing as a field of study that crosses over to many areas. And I think the panelists for today, the speakers, are a good representation in terms of the range of topics that come up, from data analytics to philosophical questions on artificial intelligence to just straightforward remixing in relationship to climate change, design as digital humanities practice, and also how knowledge, the library, plays a big role, how the library itself is changing. That's what we have. We thought of putting together something like this. If we're able to move forward a few of these in the future, we would like to feature people that have collaborated, and also outside, of course, people that are prominent in this kind of activity, and just kind of like develop an awareness of the kind of research and innovation that's taking place, critical thinking that's taking place in terms of our understanding of recycling knowledge, reappropriating it, and turning it into something new. And the panelists today, I think, are experts in all of these things I mentioned. So I'm very excited as to what they will be presenting. If you would like to do a question and answer, you can do that. There should be a Q&A. Also, if you would like to, you could put it in the chat. Some people have it in the chat, but it might be easier to do it on a Q&A if you can do that. But Tara will be kind enough to moderate those areas to make sure that no questions are missed. If you would like to have access to the video and ask a question verbally, Tara can make that possible for you as well. You can just let us know through the chat, or through, well, maybe through a direct message to Tara, and then she can look into that for you. I would like to thank Tara. Are we recording already or not yet? Oh yeah, we're recording.
Yes.
I apologize. Okay, so I would like to thank Bill Doan, Tara Kaimi at ADRI. I would like to also thank Wagner Mendoza Whitehead and Kaylee Maines, who promoted this as well through the School of Visual Arts and the College of Arts and Architecture. Our Dean, Steve Carpenter, who's done a phenomenal job in making sure that the arts thrive, art and research in design and architecture thrive in the university at this time, which is very difficult. He's been very supportive of events like this, so we really thank him. And I really thank also my community at Penn State. Even though we're remote, I feel very lucky to be in a place where I was able to remain productive, and we were able to put through this volume, this anthology. The environment there is really, it's very, very supportive, and it makes you want to get up and work every day. So I'm thankful for that, for the community of Penn State. So I don't know if Owen or xtine would like to say anything before we move on.
Just thank you all for being here. Thank you, Eduardo, for working with your team at Penn State to host us. And I'm just excited to be here and to see you. It's nice to see your faces.
Okay. Owen, anything you would like to add as moderator?
Nothing major. Again, I'd just like to welcome everyone. I'm very excited to see our panelists here today, and some of our guests are other contributors from previous books. So delighted to see so many participants, and can't wait to see how the talks go.
Great. So one thing I would like to share is that everybody here participating today has been a contributor to one of our anthologies. And Burdick and David Gunkel have contributed to our most recent anthology, and I'll just share with you. This is what it looks like. It took us 3 years to get to this, so it wasn't gonna be. It literally was like there it is. It was supposed to be like 6 months earlier, and then it was really 2 years when it turned into 3 years. because of the pandemic, everything just fell apart. It coincided with other things we were doing as collaborators, and we had this intense time. But it was worthwhile, and we're very happy with the results. And so also Paul contributed to Keywords, which is a previous collection anthology. So everybody here has been a contributor, and we thought that we would bring them together to discuss some of the things that have come up in those particular contributions they've made, but also it doesn't have to be about that. It can be just about anything that's on their minds right now in relationship to remix in terms of the field that they're involved in. So with that said, what I'll do is I'll introduce I'm Burdick, and then and you can present, and you should be able to have access to the screen. So Burdick is a research professor in the School of Design at the University of Technology, Sydney, where she's co-director of the Knowledge Design Lab. Her practice-based research explores new forms of knowledge production through the design of media visualizations, interfaces, and new forms of and publications. I apologize. Current projects include the multimedia work Trina, a design fiction, is forthcoming, it's a publication, and the digital edition of the new Burrough, Shakespeare, with the Center of Digital Humanities Research at Texas A&M. She is co-author of the Digital Humanities, MIT Press in 2012, and was design editor of electronicbookreview.com for over 20 years. So, and you're really a pioneer in this area of the digital humanities, so we're very happy to have you on board. And I'll let you do your presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Eduardo. Okay, let's see. I'm going to share my screen. Let's pray that this works. Okay. All right, so I am coming to you today. Wait, hold on. I just need to do a wee bit of reorganization here on my screen. There we go. Okay, well, first, thank you to Eduardo, xtine, and Owen for inviting me to be a part of the book and to participate in this panel. I'm always honored to be included in multidisciplinary conversations in which I can offer a design perspective. At the Knowledge Design Lab at UTS, our work is concerned with the epistemic effects of design choices based on the idea that knowledge is design dependent. Our practice-based research is necessarily interdisciplinary and collaborative, and our projects enable researchers to gain new insights into their materials. As design scholars, we bring what we learn to dialogues within design, the digital humanities, and science and technology studies, which is what brings me here today. Whoa. I always hate when it makes that little sound. Okay, there we go. My interest in remix theory is tied to my work thinking about how epistemic structures are designed into media, technologies, human-built environments, processes and protocols, information, and discourse. I'm interested in how a thing, media, information, and object might be used in ways other than those originally intended. I'm also interested in the new tools that emerge from this reworking, particularly when the tools give rise to not only new aesthetic forms, but also new ways of knowing. The materials I'm interested in remixing are Western systems of knowledge production and their informationalizing infrastructures. I'm interested in the political implications of remix as a strategy for decolonizing classification systems that orient us toward ideas and species in ways that emphasize individual differences rather than entangled relations. My chapter in the handbook thus looks at how models of knowledge are designed into the architectures and protocols of 4 different libraries and how remix theory might inform the problematics and possibilities of each. So what I'm going to do is give you a quick glimpse at the chapter that I've contributed. So we're going to look today very relatively briefly at how each of these 4 libraries, architectures, and protocols structure assemblies of people, robots, algorithms, books, and even shelves, floors, and walls, demonstrating the epistemic effects of design. Oops, didn't mean to do that. The Seattle Central Library's spiral stacks materialize the relative positionality of the Dewey Decimal Classification. In spite of its unique form, the architecture is built upon age-worn disciplinary categories grounded in the project of bringing order to all the world's knowledge. At the University of Chicago's Mansueto Library, a giant glass dome sits atop subterranean stacks that are inhospitable to humans, but suited to retrieval robots. The public spaces are filled with light, but the library's collection is literally and metaphorically a black box. Efficiency dominates. By contrast, Sitterwork, a private art library in Switzerland, employs a small army of robots that spend each night tracking books, allowing readers by day to place them in arrangements of their own aesthetic choosing on shelves and tables. What results is a library that's in a dynamic state of remix. Taking this notion one step further, the speculative universal programmable library imagined by Matthew Battles and Jeffrey Schnapp in The Library Beyond the Book uses algorithmic logistics to create a library in a perpetual state of flow, what Eduardo has called a regenerative remix. Now I'm going to take a moment to show you the designed infrastructures through which these models of knowledge are enacted to give you a sense of what this means in material terms. The Seattle Central Library is prized for its innovative architecture, and it is indeed spectacular. One of the library's innovations is the book spiral, a continuous loop ordered according to the Dewey Decimal Classification. As you may recall, the system has 10 main classes that are subdivided into ever more granular categorical distinctions, meant to bring order to the entire world of knowledge. You can see in the image here how the relative indexicality of the system is literally designed into the floor with movable tiles. The library's design embodies the way in which a classification is, according to Bowker and Starr, a spatio-temporal segmentation of the world, defined by mutually exclusive categories and a totalizing impulse. As with all classifications, the categories are culturally specific, with all the issues that entails. Thus, the ostensibly progressive architecture is, to my mind, decidedly retrograde. The reading room of the Mansueto Library is a glass-encased domed structure. The sunlit bubble is designed as a space for contemplation and study. Underneath lies a massive documents collection within a light and climate-controlled archive, accessible only through a system of barcodes, storage algorithms, human workers, and robots. This is the library's automated storage and retrieval system, which traces its origins to warehouses and fulfillment centers. Warehouse management is enabled by addressability, meaning each object has a unique identifier that allows inventory control software to track its movement and metadata. The way in which the objects are organized on the warehouse floor depends upon a workflow designed to optimize movement, time, and accuracy. With the Mansueto system, robotic cranes retrieve bins that hold books of similar dimensions as they are called up through online orders. The organization of the stacks might be considered random or chaotic, legible only to the machines. Librarians pick and pack books in a manner similar to warehouse workers. The order of logistics has demolished the chance associations of the open stacks. CITRWorks knowledge design, on the other hand, celebrates the idiosyncratic connections people make with books by descripting technologies made for inventory control. The library eschews the use of a universal classification system in favor of what it calls continuous inventory, enabled by RFID technologies. By day, books are placed on tables and shelves in changeable configurations arranged by library patrons. Each night, robots scan the shelves, tracking the address of every book situated in the library's alphanumeric grid. CITRWorks provides a range of ways that its users can create a remix. A book can be placed on the library's shelves or arranged in a tabletop display. Within the online database, a book can be placed in an endless array of user-created collections. CITRWorks calls their approach dynamic order, which gives agency to the users who power the library's knowledge practices. The speculative universal programmable library is imagined as a serendipity-producing machine that combines remix curatorial processes with automated movable storage. Like CITRWorks, the UPL is exploratory, playful, and unpredictable with a key difference. Books and people are no longer the only moving parts. The UPL is inspired by the robotic shelving of Amazon's Kiva systems, which puts the library's entire physical infrastructure on the move. In a fulfillment center, Kiva's inventory pods sit atop robotic drive units that follow a grid of barcodes that span the warehouse floor. Pod traffic, in which a fleet of moving units seeks out stationary human pickers, is managed through software informed by up-to-the-minute inventory data. To optimize efficiency in chaotic storage systems such as this, warehouse management software moves popular items closer to the pickers in fluid patterns as seen in the patent image on the left. Jesse LeCavalier calls this, quote, a dynamic index of consumer demand mediated through the barcode and mapped onto space, end quote. Similarly, grocery stores choreograph shoppers' movements through the feedback loop of the planogram, as we see on the right, an updatable algorithmically generated shelving layout based on inventory data and shopping trends. The UPL appropriates the algorithmic logistics that manage the warehouse and the grocery store in order to support remixing, no longer suited to the fixity of vertical steel stacks or even a book spiral. The remix library of the future will instead require the undifferentiated box of the fulfillment center. What we see here are drawings of a generic distribution center that stretches far and wide. On the inside, one can imagine an undulating interior landscape enacting the aesthetic potentiality of the regenerative remix. So this has been a very quick introduction to how epistemology and material meet in the architectures, technologies, and protocols of the library, leading to 4 distinct examples of knowledge design, where Seattle Central and Mansueto reify universal order and market forces. CITRWorks and the UPL use remix to not only resist, but to rework those very same components. What results are models of knowledge that are combinatory and contingent, aesthetic practices in a perpetual state of becoming, built out of that most solid and stable of media, the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and that was really great. Great to see the images too, you know, and with the narrative along with it. We'll before we get into questions, just to move along, we'll go with the next person. Will be David J. Gunkel. He will be presenting next. He's an award-winning educator, scholar and author specializing in ethics of emerging technology. He has published over 90 scholarly journal articles and book chapters and is the author of 13 influential books. I'm highly expecting the 14th on AI and remix, by the way. 13 influential books, including The Machine Question, MIT Press, 2012, of Remixology, Ethics, and Aesthetics After Remix, also MIT Press, and Robot Rights, MIT Press in 2018, as well as Deconstruction, also by the MIT Press in 2021. And I will let David present now.
All right, so thank you to everyone for showing up today and joining in the launch of this book and celebrating its publication. My special thanks to Eduardo, xtine, and Owen, who really took the lead on making this happen, organizing and editing, and finally getting this all put together and organizing today's event too. So without that, none of us would be here and this work would not be seen. So let me just share my screen here and we can get going on what I have planned for us. All right, so Eduardo, are you able to see the slides? I'm sorry.
Yeah, they look great.
Okay, great, wonderful. All right, so I've titled my presentation today along with the title of my chapter in the book, Computational Creativity, Algorithms, Art, and Artistry. And my talk today, which is going to be rather short, has a thesis, and that thesis is very simple. Computational creativity remixes remix as the art of the post-human, or the art of post-humanism. What I want to do today then is not so much prove this thesis, but lay out its terms, conditions, and consequences in an effort to seed discussion and debate about the impact and significance of increasingly creative machines. But rather than talk in generalities, I want to proceed by way of some very specific examples. In the area of audio remix and mashup, there is something of a special place for the band Nirvana. In fact, there is, as I'm sure you've all noted, a kind of cottage industry in reconfigured versions of Nirvana songs. But most recently, we get a new remix from Lost Tapes of the 27 Club, and they released what is being promoted as a new Nirvana song titled Drowned in the Sun. Now, unlike previous remixes that had been produced by human artists manipulating recorded material, this song was created using Google Magenta, a recurrent neural network that was trained on 30 existing Nirvana compositions, and then set loose to generate new melodies and new lyrics that were consistent with the songwriting of Kurt Cobain and the recognizable sound of his band. And if you've not heard it, I want to play you a little segment here so you can hear what they were able to do by using this recurrent neural network trained on existing compositions. So I'll just play you a short bit here. All right, so it goes on from there. And let me just break down here the technical details so we know what's going on. The music you hear was machine generated. Google Magenta was trained on Nirvana songs that were fed into the recurrent neural network as MIDI data. The song data was broken into identifiable segments, which helped with the processing. The neural network then generated new versions of Nirvana sounding music that was outputted in MIDI form and then could be reassembled in post-production. The lyrics for the new song were also generated by a neural network that had been trained on textual data of existing Cobain lyrics. This effort generated a large number of different texts that were then evaluated by human curators who selected and recombined the best elements. Finally, a Kurt Cobain sound-alike human vocalist was recruited to sing the machine-generated lyrics to the accompaniment of the machine-generated music. Clearly, the creation of this new Nirvana song has important points of contact with efforts in remix theory and practice. If we, just for the sake of argument, work with the proposal of Kirby Ferguson, we can see how Drowned in the Sun conforms to the copy, transform, combine formula. So what we hear in Drowned in the Sun is the product of this remix formula or algorithm made computable, or at least partially computable. But this is also the point at which we can begin to see crucial differences that concern the role and function of technology in this entire process. Here's how Simon Colton, one of the innovators in the field of computational creativity, explains the difference. Computational creativity is the term used to describe the subfield of artificial intelligence research, where we study how to build software that exhibits behaviors deemed creative in people. In more practical terms, we investigate how to engineer software systems that take on some of the creative responsibility in arts and science projects. This usage of computers in the creative process differs from the majority of ways in which software is used, where the program is a mere tool to enhance human creativity. In contrast, with computational creativity research, we endeavor to build software which is independently creative, either to act as a collaborator with people or to be an autonomous artist, musician, writer, designer, engineer, or scientist. In remix, the technology, typically the turntable, the computer, the audio software, whatever, is understood and situated as a tool or instrument that is employed by a human artist or artists. With computational creativity, by contrast, the technology is no longer limited to this instrumentalist way of thinking. It is situated as a collaborator or an autonomous artist in its own right. In Drowned in the Sun, for instance, the song is the product of human-machine collaboration, where each agent contributes something unique to the final mix. And this is where things get interesting. Remix is often critiqued and dismissed as repetitive, derivative, and not authentic. It is denigrated as a kind of mechanical process that is the antithesis of genuine artistic expression. Advocates of the practice, however, push back against this criticism, arguing that remix and the art of the DJ is in fact a true human creative activity on par with other forms of human creative artistic endeavor. Computational creativity challenges the humanist assumptions or the anthropocentric assumptions that both sides of this debate already endorse and operationalize. In doing so, computational creativity opens the opportunities for examining questions that push the innovations of remix beyond its anthropocentric framework. First, it critically confronts and challenges the assumptions of human exceptionalism. As the machines increasingly encroach on human abilities in all areas of endeavor, creativity seems to be the last remaining bulwark of human exceptionalism. Computational creativity challenges this boundary, raising fundamental questions that cut to the very core of humanism and the humanities. Second, it elaborates and pushes the envelope on the question concerning the author. Who or what speaks in and through a text or artwork that has been created or generated by an algorithm, AI, or other kind of artifact? Who or what is the artist of a work that has been produced in and by collaboration with the machine that itself has some claim on authorship and agency? And how does this work with or complicate existing IP law and copyright? Finally, there are moral and legal questions concerning responsibility. Who or what is able to respond for texts, images, and other artworks produced or co-produced by AI, algorithms, and robots? Who or what is able to be held responsible for both the good and the bad outcomes? And what does artistic responsibility, accountability, and liability look like in the age of increasingly creative machines? Remix already prepares the way for grappling with and responding to many of these challenges. Efforts in both remix theory and practice have been at work reconfiguring and remixing how we conceive of and understand concepts of originality, creativity, authorship, and artistry. Computational creativity challenges remix to take these innovations further, permitting them to question and reevaluate its own anthropocentric and humanist assumptions and pretensions. In this way, it is that computational creativity remixes remix as the art of the post-human. So that's all I have by way of prepared remarks. I thank you all.
Thank you for that presentation, David. Very thought-provoking for sure. I'm sure we're going to have much to talk about after the next presentation. Next, we have Paulie Miller, DJ Spooky, who is very well known, as many of you know here. He's a composer, multimedia artist, and writer whose work immerses audiences in a blend of genres, global culture, and environmental and social issues. Miller has collaborated with an array of recording artists, including Metallica, Chuck D, Steve Reich, and Yoko Ono. His album of 2018, DJ Spooky Presents Phantom Dance Hall, debuted at number 3 on Billboard Reggae. His books include the award-winning Rhythm Science, published by MIT Press in 2004, Sound Unbound, an anthology about digital music and media, The Book of Ice, a visual and acoustic portrait of the Antarctic, and The Imaginary App, also by MIT Press, on how apps change the world. His writing has been published by The Village Voice, The Source, and Art Forum, and he was the founding executive editor of Origin Magazine. Please welcome Paul D. Miller.
Hey, everybody. First and foremost, it's an absolute pleasure to hear all of the different perspectives. And I just want to say to the audience, you should treasure this. It's very rare that you have such a mega mix of perspectives. And you have to remember, one of the core components of our modern era is that we're in a data-driven society. And while I haven't contributed to this particular book, I've been a fan of what Eduardo's been up to for years, and we've stayed in touch over the years. So I just want to do a quick sort of a response to what actually I really enjoyed David's work, and let's dive in. So when you start to think about the notion of composition by way of collage, one of my favorite people to kind of reference is John Cage and his piece Imaginary Landscape. It's considered generally one of the first compositions for turntables. And if anybody out there has a free moment, it's basically you go into a room and you can imagine that there are skipping records playing crazy frequencies, and that is the composition. It was revolutionary at the time, and it inspired a lot of people to rethink their relationship to both collage and composition, but from the viewpoint of materials. And I really enjoyed what some of the other speakers were saying as well, from the viewpoint of knowledge is design dependent, but it's also context dependent. So the idea here is that how do we start to think about art, design, and collage and from the viewpoint of practice? So this is a piece by Namjoon Pike called Global Groove. And I'm using these two examples of both John Cage and Namjoon Pike as two people who really got how to put this into practice. So I'm just using these as quick examples. If you went to you can see all of their work online. There's plenty of material, but just from the riff on what David was talking about, this notion of synthesis, it's a dialectical process. You're looking at thesis, antithesis, and synthesis from the viewpoint of both, on one hand, a philosophical implication of people like, the Platonic sense of discourse, but applied to sound. And what's so beautiful about these kinds of moments, sorry, my headphones keep popping out here. This is the problem with AirPods Pro. Hopefully you guys can hear me. The fun part about all of this is that the tools have changed, but the concepts haven't necessarily. And we're in an era where collage has become the basic global vocabulary. So from my perspective, Namjoon Pike and John Cage in the fine arts on one hand, and people like Marcel Duchamp, they gave us better sort of critical thinking tools. Duchamp's Sync Urinal, Namjoon Pike's Global Groove, and John Cage's Imaginary Landscapes. Those are my points of entry into this conversation. I wanted to show you guys another sense of different kind of notion of critical perspectives. And this is a map by Leonardo da Vinci from about 500 years ago. It's an axonometric representation of the city of Imola from, I believe, if I remember correctly, 1502. Now, what's fascinating is that Da Vinci is generally considered to be one of the major artists to rethink the notion of tools, concepts, and how we look at the way a tool can kind of transform everything from the military industrial complex of his time to the artworks he generated for the Da Vinci's and the Borgias and so on, the various major figures of the Renaissance. So he's the first sort of major interdisciplinary artist. But let's fast forward to that same area several hundred years later. And this is a GPS guided satellite map of the same region. So you can see that there's a kind of axonometric representation. And I'll just skip back so you can see that. And so this was a battle map. And the idea was that it was meant to be a legible surface. Cesare and Borgia needed a map of the city so that they could make war plans. And what's fascinating is that to imagine a city from above and then see that same city using a satellite, that the technology that didn't exist from several hundred years in the future, you can easily see some pretty amazing notions of how tools can reshape perspective. But above all, the tools of that time didn't even exist. And Da Vinci is someone that I think is really resonant with this conversation we're having about remixing this kind of tools that we use to create, whether it be a map, whether it be a composition, whether it be an essay. You're essentially saying that art is a kind of new kind of data set. And to me, at least, it's a really powerful insight into how art and the era of kind of not just collage, because collage is kind of a surface level event, but it's also a deep structural psychology about tools giving us this new sense of the potential of what is possible. Again, I'm going to go to that phrase, the potential of what is possible. So if you think of a song as a data set, it's just selected notes that can be copy and pasted in any format, whatever format you want, whether it be magnetic tape, whether it be algorithmic driven software, whether it be something like David Cope's artificial intelligence kind of EMI. It's called, if I remember correctly, it stands for electronic music generator. So people like Stephen Wolfram, who's a legendary mathematician, all of these guys, I think the beauty of the moment is that we're looking at the kind of, there we go, I found my extra AirPod, it popped out. We're looking at kind of an intuitive relationship to kind of mathematics of the subconscious. And that's where I think Da Vinci and this map that I'm showing you are really elegant metaphors for artists rethinking tools of whatever era they can kind of respond to. Those tools allow us to have different insights into new perspectives. And again, I really enjoyed David's playing of Google Magenta. In fact, I have a couple projects with Google coming up. So it was refreshing to see Magenta get a shout out there. All right. Recently, I did a series of compositions remixing the internet. What's fascinating is that 2019 was the 50th anniversary of the internet. And I was commissioned to do a composition looking at the exponential growth of the internet and the way it shaped the way we think about it.
I think we lost Paul. So this is oh, he's back. Great. This is better than live television, I think.
Sorry, you have to. The host has disabled the video, so whoever is the host, you have to re-enable me to have video.
Okay, let me do that.
Okay, I've been assigned as a co-host. There we go.
Okay, can you?
All right.
Okay, great.
Amusingly enough, these AirPods, man, I tell you, it's a real drag. They can pop out, and I actually would love to remix these so they have a little hook. I mean, like there's these ones for active runners from Beats by Dre, but they don't have good sound quality. So what ended up happening is the control mechanisms right here and I touched the control mechanism which hung up the ear. You use it to end the song or to end a phone call. And yeah, modern technology. My apologies there.
All right.
So I was in mid-sentence talking about, let's see, Da Vinci and some of the issues that had given us new tools. I do want to keep this brief because I know that you guys are in the middle of your thing. And I just want to show, this is a fun photo of an old photo, me, Grandmaster Flash, and DJ Crush from Japan. When I do collaborations and remixes, a lot of the work comes from the notion of what, you have a collision between code and culture. And when I say culture, say for example, DJ Crush is a very renowned Japanese DJ, Grandmaster Flash, obviously you guys have seen photos of his work. There are kind of approaches that each of us bring to the table. And when I was looking at that collaboration, and I wanted to show you guys that photo, because I move across cultures, and I really think that how we navigate this era, whether it be to this morning, one of the most beautiful news that I've seen is that the Facebook Oversight Board kind of approved Trump's being banned or deplatformed. And the platform itself, one could argue that electronic music is a different kind of approach to what is a platform. And I think that that's an incredible issue that we can kind of use. And I'll wrap up my discussion with just a couple more photos. And just wanted to say it's a real pleasure to kind of work with you guys here. So here we go. This is the whiteboard that set up Google Maps. And the reason I'm bringing this up in light of what David was saying is that the gentleman who invented this, Noel Gordon, he had a team that was trying to figure out an algorithmic analysis of how we make decisions about navigation. So you can see at the bottom of the map, it's just A to B. And what's fascinating there is I visited Google's office because I was very intrigued by Google Maps over the years. And the notion of the legible landscape and remixing how we interact with that, these are things that are algorithmically driven, but at the same time are stunningly kind of in the realm of an intuitive relationship to mathematics. So too with music, we make choices as we choose notes. So I'm using that as a corollary there. A couple of my compositions have been played as remixes in radically unexpected places. A little while ago, I remixed and projected D.W. Griffith's film Birth of a Nation at the Acropolis. And we got the Greek government to give me the Acropolis for an evening concert. And we put sound systems throughout the ruins and projected D.W. Griffith's film remixed live. We had about 5,000 people come to the concert, and I was just like, hey, everybody, I'm the first DJ to play here in a couple of thousand years. Thanks for coming to the show. And Birth of a Nation was one of the films that really set the tone for how we thought about both editing and composition and narrative in the 20th century. But for the 21st century, it's part of an open source initiative because it's from 1915 and thus out of copyright. And so I wanted to kind of get people to rethink the toxic legacy of this film on how we thought about linear narrative. D.W. Griffith influenced everyone from Francis Ford Coppola. There's a very famous scene in Apocalypse Now where they hang Richard Wagner's music is playing from loudspeakers, Flight of the Valkyries, while they bomb a village. And Flight of the Valkyries is one of the most major songs that inspired and influenced Griffith when he was working on it. So they'd have an orchestra play a film. What I ended up doing was appropriating the film's soundtrack, remixing it, and then having Kronos Quartet, which is a legendary music ensemble, play my compositions. You can find it on iTunes or whatever music format you're into. And it's just called Rebirth of a Nation. So I'm just using that as one example of a remix. And I thought the paradox of playing one of the most toxic films of the 20th century and remixing it at the Acropolis, you had this notion of architecture and sound. So, there's an infamous phrase, architecture is nothing but frozen music. So too with collage, appropriation, and DJing. One could argue that music is nothing but liquid architecture. So I'm going to wrap up with that because there's plenty of other examples I could show of remixes. I have zillions of audio examples as well. But I want to just keep this brief as a response to a wonderful book that Eduardo and Owen and everyone in your team has done. I read it really when I was first notified about it. So I'm a fan of what you guys are up to, and it's a real pleasure to hear everyone's thoughts on such an important topic. Meanwhile, I'm struggling to keep these AirPods Pro in my ears. So very 21st century first world problems. There we go. So Eduardo, thanks. And I guess that's it for me.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. I've been a fan of yours for a very long time. Actually, I remember at one point, I don't remember where this was, but I was flying on a plane. And when your first book came out, the Rhythm Science, well before I was able to write anything about remixing, and I read it on the plane. I was reading it, and I never thought I would be. You know, you never know what the future holds. So I'm very honored to be here with you, and also with Anne, whose book on digital humanities has preceded much of what we're discussing today. So it's really a very unique panel. And David, of course, has very important publications in combining philosophy, bringing together philosophy and artificial intelligence and remixing. So, you know, we have a few things I think that will come up in the discussion. I'll just open it up for that. I don't know if anybody would like to say anything, maybe Owen or xtine, or I could just go to questions let me see if there's any questions. There was one question by Jocelyn Wilson, which David did comment on, but maybe David, you would like to elaborate on it since that question is there. The question is, in regards to your presentation, does this remove the DJ and producer? What are the implications of doing so? And this is obviously in relationship to what Magenta is doing. So maybe you want to elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, I typed very quickly a response, and the response was, it's not so much a removal of the DJ and producer from the process, but it's a kind of reconfiguration and replacement of the standard way we think about these things. So in the sort of work people have done in technological unemployment and robots taking over jobs, it isn't that the automation necessarily displaces the human worker, but it sort of reconfigures what the human worker does in the occupation. And so these new collaborative opportunities are opening up different ways of thinking about what the human being does in this process and what the human contribution uniquely is to these kinds of activities. But obviously you can see this is an evolving landscape, and as the devices become experimented with and integrated in different kinds of ways, we'll see different kinds of reconfigurations of human machine assemblages with regards to the production of all kinds of art forms. I think you see really interesting things happening with Holly Herndon. You see really interesting things happening with the Shimon robot out of Georgia Tech. All kinds of really innovative usage of these technologies really being brought into performance spaces and in artistic areas that the scientists don't ever have access to. I think this is crucial why artists have to be involved in implementing and developing these AI tools and technologies, because the engineers do this thinking the stuff is going to be used for one thing or another, and the artists always show us there's way more we can do with this stuff, and there's way more interesting things they can bring to bear on all kinds of different human activities. So this is truly interdisciplinary, and I think one of the problems that we've had in the past decade is that we let the engineers sort of take the lead, and that's good to get the new tech out there, but I really think the artists and the humanists have to get into the mix and begin to reconfigure and reorient the way these things are actually utilized, and that's very important.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. I mean, I think that's a very, I think the challenge that we have is in part where, almost like what are we going to do as humans? The bottom line, I guess, would be that, right? So as AI tends to be taken over through, what it's able to do, things that were, considered even creative, right? So obviously that's what this is. Making music is considered one of the most privileged human centric endeavors that we have as in terms of culture. Everybody consumes music. So I think,
hey, Eduardo, you mind if I jump in on that, David? I really found that refreshing, and also Anne Burdick's representation of the Seattle Library. The architects for that, if I remember correctly, were Diller and Scafidio. But there was a theater piece that I saw a little while ago that was set in an Amazon fulfillment center, and you know, the workers obviously are being just ground into the dust, so to speak, in a very Marxist, you know, phrase. All that is solid melts into the air. Literally, all human beings in that kind of context. So it was a pretty wild place to set a contemporary avant-garde theater. But you know, when I think about what David was riffing on, what Anne was riffing on, just from the presentations from the moment, is that there's that infamous Sigmund Freud phrase, the uncanny, the unheimlich. And what's going on right now with stuff like Spotify or all the recommendation engines that led, you know, amusingly enough, straight to January 6th and QAnon. We're in a strange moment where these recommendation engines are just echo chambers of the sort of the human psychology that has been algorithmically analyzed and quantified. And it's eerily precise. I mean, if you look at Cambridge Analytica and the scandals that happened with the 2016 election, those can be weaponized in all sorts of ways. So too with music, where people have been trying to figure out ways to gamify and then use in a corrupt manner SoundCloud, Spotify, your clicks, your likes, you know, what category your music gets put into, so that you can. YouTube is also a wild playground. I'm always intrigued by the illicit and underworld activities that go along with these things. You know, sort of people are getting bots now it's incredible to see a bot as a recommendation engine that drives someone into like QAnon or something like that. But again, so too with music. So I would just want to say we're at a crossroads where notions of digital literacy and being able to have the tools that undergird democracy itself. Music, and one could argue collage and sampling, are kind of a beautiful reflection of that democratization of culture. And I'm just putting that out there as an artist, that it was, you know, we're at a very intense crossroads as a culture. So the book is more important than ever. So just putting that out there.
So in terms of, I guess, and just to ask a question related to this, I think the issue here is how much does a machine start to do? And one of the things that happens with libraries is they have had a very, they keep getting reinvented in a way, and your reflections on this are very challenging, I think, for people who may have libraries are like, right, Alexandria. I mean, we can go back in time, and it's one of the most established institutions that all cultures cherish. So we are now in a situation where the kinds of libraries you're presenting to us here are not libraries in their common sense. So what do you think the library is? Perhaps I'm going to realize it and what it could be. I mean, you kind of allude to it in a way, but if you could, I don't want you to speculate necessarily, but what is a library today? What would you say it is?
Oh boy, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, not your grandma's library or however that. So I don't know. I guess all these questions, and this is just sort of, my head's swimming a bit with the comments immediately preceding your question. I think that as we've inherited these formulations of what art or music or knowledge should look like and how it should perform and behave and be and what we expect from it. And then we bring in these technologies. And the question to me isn't how can we recreate what we already have, but what do these collaborations lead to that are unexpected and interesting for us as humans? And so that's why, to me, like the, faking a Nirvana song just, I'm skeptical of that as it's pattern recognition and recreating a pattern. And it's only meaningful, and this, Paul mentioned, knowledge being context dependent. It's only meaningful if humans find it meaningful. And it only fits into this category of art or music if humans say it fits into this category of art or music. It sounds like, looks like this pattern that we recognize as art or music and have created. And I think that the emphasis on the individual and, the history of the author is really huge in this conversation, because that was a cultural invention that's specific to our culture, right? And so there's lots of other formulations of what collaboration and collective creation can be. And so I guess what I'm interested in, and if you think of the regenerative remix library, the sort of the final one of the four, the potential is that you're creating something that couldn't be created by any one participant alone, but you're creating something that is the result of, you know, readers in their interest in reading, and writers in their interest in writing, and algorithms that are, you know, constructed to look for certain things and reproduce certain things. And out of that, you know, you have this sort of undulating flow that will look like something that no one of the participants would have created on their own, but collectively producing something that we, you know, haven't necessarily seen before, but recognize as something that it has potential or is interesting. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Thanks for that. I just got notice that Virginia is here, but she's on the attendees side. Tara, I don't know if it would be possible to give her access to the video and the audio.
Yep, I'm on it, Eduardo. I'll do it right now.
Thank you so much. So while that happens, I'll go ahead and introduce Virginia. And then she should be coming along very soon. So Virginia Kuhn is a professor of cinema and media arts and practice at USC School of Cinematic Arts. Her work centers on visual and digital rhetoric, feminist theory, and algorithmic research methods. Her books include Shaping the Digital Dissertation, Knowledge Production in the Arts and the Humanities. That's an open book publication actually in this year, 2021. And Future Text, Subversive Performances in Feminist Bodies, Parlor Press, 2016. She has also published several peer-reviewed collections of remix videos, including the video essay, An Emergent Taxonomy of Cinematic Writing. That's Cinephile's production of 2016, and Mamla, From Panel to Gallery, Kairos in 2013, published by Kairos. From Gallery to Web Text, a multimodal anthology, also by Kairos in 2008. Please welcome Virginia Kuhn. Hi, thank you for making it.
Hello there, and I'm so sorry for my tardiness. I had no power. There's been digging going on in my neighborhood, and so after many frantic calls to the cable company, I have a hotspot in my phone now. So I think my connection should be pretty stable, but
we're very happy you made it. We'll let you.
Thank you. And I'm just trying to sort myself out. Apologies. I hope you can see my screen and my messy screen, which I will share in just a moment. I'm also on a different computer, so it's a little daunting here. Wow, it's just disappeared from view on my machine, but there we go. Okay. All right. Thank you. I think I should be good now. So I want to talk a little bit about remix and lettered orality. And for many years, my work has kind of focused on the work of Walter Ong and his 1982 kind of seminal text, Orality and Literacy, the Technologizing of the Word. And in this text, Ong differentiates between oral culture, the features of oral culture, he traces it, and then into print literate culture. and then into contemporary culture, which he calls either residual or secondary orality. And I think key to this understanding is that print actually changes consciousness. So there is a definite differentiation. So for many years, I have, kind of taken that as my my jumping off point in terms of the work that I do. And first of all, I'm so sorry, I should stop and define remix. What I say when I mean remix is a utterance that uses words, all of the available semiotic resources. So I'm mostly talking about video essays. Video remix, for my part, has been where I focus most of my energy. And so again, it's a video essay that uses words, moving images, still images, sound, and makes some kind of digital argument. So I had thought for so many years, and a mentor of mine, Gregory Ulmer, had said, "Oh, you're the associate director of the Institute for Multimedia Literacy. That makes no sense. Media and literacy aren't good words together." And it does make, that is true in some ways, because media is already plural. And so, multimedia seems to be extraneous. And so for many years, I sort of bought into that. And I think we need a new term to talk about the habits of mind that we have, or that are necessary for the 21st century. However, a couple of years ago now, in conversation with a few people, I started thinking that actually, and Gregory Ulmer, I'm sorry, said to me, multimedia literacy is like saying a lettered orality. They don't work together. So I always thought, yeah, that's ridiculous, lettered orality. But I've now actually completely embraced the word lettered, or the adage lettered orality. And here's why. I know this is a heavily text-filled slide, and I won't read it exactly the way it is, but what I'm talking about with lettered orality is combining the techniques associated with oral culture, rhyme, repetition, things, the affective, and then pairing them with features of literate culture, such as logic, abstraction, and statistics. And I think it gets us to a place where we recognize all those forms of knowledge as meaningful. So again, lettered orality, it encapsulates the type of associational, empathic, and the maybe subordinative ways of knowing, but it's also deeply anchored in the hierarchical and the analytical potentials of the written word. I think importantly too, with a real strong understanding of lettered orality, we can resist this kind of narrative of progress that suggests if we're somehow just really patient, that things will get better, more equitable in the world. And we know, history is cyclical. It just doesn't work that way. So I think, and I do think the print-based kind of mindset is what leads us to believe that. So this stance of lettered orality isn't founded on one register of meaning or the other, but it embraces them all as potentially appropriate to a given situation. And I have to say, I started embracing this. I spent 2019 in fact, when Eduardo first got in touch with me about this book, I was right in the midst of a divorce and breast cancer. And but more than that, I was just at this point of really institutional desolation. My university just seemed like it wasn't, we were having scandal after scandal. The White House was full of people I didn't recognize. And then the move to the pandemic really, really pushed us all into these digital forms where we have very little kind of emphasis on our bodies, and it's all our brains or our minds in some way. And I think this is problematic in many, many ways. I think we've all kind of figured that out over this last year and a half. But one of the main problems, I think, is that it elides consideration. If we focus on our minds to the exclusion of our bodies, it really elides consideration of race, class, gender, ability, age, those types of things. So I just want to suggest, having defined remix and lettered orality, I want to suggest a couple of texts that I think are really ripe with potential. And one is Amit Goswami, who is the quantum activist, he suggests. He is a theoretical quantum physicist, and in fact has written a textbook that is taught in many universities in quantum physics. But Goswami believes that immateriality gives rise to materiality and not the reverse. Again, he believes that our thoughts actually give rise to the material world that we live in. I mean, he's not alone. A lot of people think this, but the difference here is that we need to, he suggests that we need to foster, our place in our individual place, but then also the key into the larger hive mind, as it were. And only in groups can we make some transformations. I'm going to skip. I also want to suggest Lisa Feldman Barrett, who has texts such as 7.5 Lessons about the brain, which are really interesting. And one of the most interesting, I think, is that the brain is all for resource management. It's really not made to think. And I don't want to suggest that the brain doesn't think, but I want to suggest that cognition goes on across the body in many ways. Another thing that Feldman Barrett notes is that when people get in groups, their brains kind of sync up together. So this individualness that we think we have is kind of a sham in many ways. And I meant to say, excuse me, I'm a little flustered from my morning, but I meant to say Amit Goswami suggests too that there's no reason that Western modes of medicine, I mean, I'm using this for medicine, but also Western modes of knowing can harmonize with non-Western modes of knowing, and here I'm kind of creating a false binary between affective and logic, but that's what I mean about kind of, we'll never go back and forget that we have writing. So we can't go back to this innocence of oral culture, but we certainly can benefit from the wisdom of oral culture and pair it with the wisdom of print literate culture. And what Goswami brings to the picture is just we can harmonize these modes together, and they're not actually in contradiction to each other many times.
Virginia, I just wanted to say, I don't know if you're showing slides, but they're not, you might be sharing a different screen.
Oh my gosh. Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, I think that's the screen. So I've done this myself. So
I'm so sorry. It's on this screen, huh?
Yeah, it's on the media res screen.
I'm so sorry. It's when I shared the screen. Again, this is a new computer. Let me share my desktop. Oh boy, you've just missed all kinds of, thank you for letting me know. And boy.
Just maybe go through this the images again, if you like, just briefly to remind us of the points.
Oh, thank you. I'll just be very, very quick about it. Now, can you see my slide that has my introduction?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Boy, I tell you. So this is Ong's book. This is my opening. This is Walter Ong's book, which would have given you some cues to the things that I was saying. And here is where I'm trying to define lettered orality that combines techniques of the affective along with techniques of that are more logical. And I'm going to go past this. This is Amit Goswami, the theoretical quantum physicist, and he has a documentary called The Quantum Activist, which I highly recommend. This is Lisa Feldman Barrett, and what I was saying about the brain evolving for resource management, not for thinking. Okay, so With all of that, I just want to mention a couple of texts that really, I think, are kind of born of lettered orality. And I'm not going to keep this up for too much longer because I'm completely mixed up from where I am now. But anyway, this is, for so many years, I have made these videos. I have been teaching video essays since 2008, almost every semester. So these things are very, very present in my life and in my thinking. But now, however, in my new life and my new way of being in the world, I'm making my work out more sculptural now. And I don't even know if I'm putting digital materials into it. So I'm really more interested in work like by Noah Purifoy, who some of you might know created the Watts Towers, which I live not too terribly far from, but also the outdoor museum in Joshua Tree. And wouldn't this be something if we focused on lettered orality and we understood that our place, our embodiment and our place in the world is really important? The stewardship for the earth, I think, would change. I think we would, what if we turned all junkyards into sculpture gardens? And what if we cared for the earth? And then I want to suggest this documentary too, Grass is Greener, which we're not too far from 420, that it feels like worth mentioning. But in this text as well, this documentary, we get the science behind cannabis, but also the non-scientific portions that have led to cannabis's jailing and stuff. And those are, the ways in which in the 1940s in this country, there was a very intentional move to call cannabis marijuana in order to associate it with Mexicans and play on people in this country's racism. I also, the Integral Cinema Project, which I've been talking to these people there, and Mark Allen Kaplan is actually someone from the Media Shamanship, or from the Integral Cinema Project. He believes in media shamanship and thinks that my having gone through, gone through this kind of horrible 2019, I am now able to kind of start healing both myself and others, or that is the hope. And the Integral Cinema Project has labeled certain, they have a whole bunch of Hollywood films that they label as integral or in different ways of different stages of development. Now, I'm not sure that I buy their labeling of the different stages of development. It seems very Western centric to me. And it also doesn't seem to, but in any case, we do know that the rise in media consumption has also been accompanied in culture by a lowering in mental health. So clearly there's a link between media and our mental health. And one thing I want to note about Mark Allen Kaplan, who started the Integral Cinema Project. He's actually a filmmaker and a psychologist. And he has a theory about three brains, and this is not the triune brain theory. There is a triune brain theory that says that the brain in our heads has three different areas and does three different things. What they talk about with the three brain theory is that there are neurons in our brain, there are neurons in our heart, and there's actually neurons in our intestines, our guts. And so we act as though, what would it mean if we actually valued the ways in which we think with all of our body and not just our head? There's 150 million neurons in our small intestine. It's the largest grouping of neurons outside of the brain. So, I mean, it's something to really think about. And paired with the Integral Cinema Project, I think, is this book on affective neurobiology in cinema, and that is by Peter Wyeth, who argues that we are kind of naturally predisposed to create cinema, that that is our main way of knowing and being in the world. So these are a couple of things. I also think, and what I did personally was I felt in 2019, I felt at the limits of what knowledge I could get from, regular channels, being an academic, from the knowledge of academia. So I started going to the desert and meditating with a shaman. I did this actually right before I found my cancer, and I think it's the way I found my cancer. It would never have been found any other way. It was almost invisible to tests. So, and I'm pretty, I did participate in ayahuasca ceremonies, and this is, for those of you who don't know, it's a vine from the Amazon that activates DMT in your system. And it's called the God molecule. And I don't mind talking about this. The legality around ayahuasca is not quite clear, but I've also taken transformational breathing workshops where if you lie on your back with your knees bent, and it's very hard to do, you do 45 minutes of this intense breathing, you can activate the DMT in the lower lobes of your lungs and have the same sort of reaction. I think all of those have made me a way better human, a way better scholar, and although you probably couldn't tell it today, and definitely a better teacher. I was going to end by showing that in media res piece that and maybe I'll try and just pull it up here quickly, because that's the last thing I just want to say about lettered orality in this book. I think, first of all, I wanted to say at the beginning that I am so delighted to be here, and so delighted to be part of this book. I tell you, working with the editors was such a pleasure at a very difficult time in my life. So I just want to suggest this, and I'll put this link somewhere, but there's this platform made by Eric Lawyer, who is not only a media artist, but one of the lead designers of the multimedia platform called Scalar. And he's got this tool called Stepways, which actually lets average users create kind of kinetic typography. And as I mentioned, I've been teaching video essays every semester, I think almost every semester since 2008. And I'm always looking for tools that allow us, I think this is what separates for me a really strong remix or digital argument or one born of lettered orality, is that it uses words. Unlike theatrical counterparts that tend to see words as just subtitles or just subservient and supplemental to the images and the sound. I think words are really, really important, and we should hang on to them. I think Remix can foster this kind of precision and economy with text that I find pretty remarkable. Thank you for putting that in the text there. So I won't go back to my slides, but I maybe just long enough to quickly say thank you so much. Thank you for paying attention to that somewhat janky presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Virginia. That was great. I think your angle on lettered orality, when I first read the premise, was very. It really made me think about how it may relate to other terms like visual literacy, obviously, and I'm just wondering if you could maybe reflect a little bit on how we may be changing the way we read, and I say that in quotes, things today. When I was reading your chapter, as well as others, I think they all sort of touch on this issue. But in terms of semiotics, images are treated differently than text, right? And part of that has to do with the way we register it. Images, we tend to compare the composition, and there's no order to reading it. And obviously, with words, we read it in terms of a specific sequence, unless it's designed as a graphic designer would to be more visual. So I'm kind of wondering how you would relate this in general to those sort of challenges that semiotics takes on repeatedly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think thank you for that. That's such a great question. I think it's so key. And this is why I think production is so important. I don't think you can really read one of these things well unless you've had to write one as well. Or I think that I want to challenge specifically the way that we ingest words and images. I don't think we have fostered anywhere near the amount of visual literacy that we should. And that's why I think Remix is so potent. It has so much potential. And I think that if we, when we really start to have to take something apart and make those same rhetorical choices that were made in the construction of something, then we really see behind the veil, if you will, and we see the constructed nature of every argument, whether it's visual or verbal or a combination. And I do think, you know, I think we can ingest words in a similar way because words are very visual in nature and we haven't given enough credence for that. You know, we tend to think that if you cite a word, you're just citing the idea. You know, we don't cite it in the same font as it was originally. Or if you think of, you know, I mean, I think this way about HTML, you know, maybe there should be, people bitch about HTML that there's, you know, you don't have an awareness of the contents inside, but maybe a bold should be a different, a completely different note. You know, a word bolded should be a completely different register than a word unbolded. I think words, their size and their shape and their color really impact their meaning. And so many studies have suggested that we react different to handwriting than we do to print writing or to font. So I think playing with all of those is really important.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think this actually relates to, in terms of how we register different media according to the context. For example, I think on film and how sound becomes invisible to us. It's almost like we just take it for granted. And in terms of reading, we often don't pay attention to the type that's being used for the particular text. Sometimes I found myself having a hard time reading something, and it has to do maybe with the typeface they chose, you know, from back in the day, whenever decisions people made. So, I mean, all this, I guess it depends on the context of the focus of the particular medium you're engaging in, you know, and I think it's a challenge to media designers in general and artists to be aware of the relationship of you know, media in general, how text and image and sound are constantly interrelating, you know, to communicate ideas. I wanted to just to go back to you know, to Anne for a second. Karen Kiefer Boyd, another contributor. I want to thank other contributors and that are here today. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk with you guys as well in the future. Karen had a specific question. I don't know if Karen would like to join us for a second if she wants to elaborate on this, but I'll read it for now. She can let us know in the text, on the chat, if she would like to talk for a little bit. But and I know that you responded, but I thought maybe you could just respond a little bit more, elaborate on it. Karen asked, I think Karen is joining us, so maybe I'll let her. Karen, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Just share your question, since you'll read it much better than me. So
okay, yes, I'd be happy to. And I love, Anne, your response to it already on there, but hopefully you might elaborate. But I was really just really fascinated with your presentation and having read your book chapter as well. And, you know, I kind of used some quotes from it to kind of, everyone was here to listen to it, so I don't necessarily need to read that. But my question comes from this, the theories of epistemologies of ignorance. And I give some examples like Charles Mills, the racial contract, as racism as an act of protection and preservation of ignorance, and James Baldwin example, the willful ignorance, and as a systematic process of self-deception, ignoring the oppressions of others and one's role in that exploitation. And I mentioned a few: Marilyn Frye, Elizabeth Spillman, and Nancy Tuana, critiques of epistemologies of ignorance. And I've been using it as a lens in many different ways. And I just was, asking Anne, how might epistemologies of ignorance be a lens, even visualized to interpret the work that she's presenting to us on the epistemological effects of design choices based on the idea of knowledge is design dependent. And so from that, Anne gives an answer, but Anne, maybe you want to elaborate on that.
Sure. So let's see. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question. Definitely racism and ignorance are designed into all kinds of tools and things that we use and systems. So willful ignorance, like the intentioned not seeing of something, right? I from a design standpoint, of course, I just think about, methods of visibility or invisibility or foreground, background, how you bring something into, one's line of sight and hence one's, construct of the world, or, just whether it's there or not. But if it's not, where is it, is an interesting question. And how might you do a project that could make like palpable the active elision of another point of view. And I think this really comes to also point of view is really important. And I really liked in Paul's presentation, the Da Vinci, map to the Google Street Map. And so, what can be seen, how, and by whom is a really loaded political question and a design question. So yeah, I mean, that's how I would think about it.
Yeah, hey, Eduardo, you mind if I jump in and just as a riff on what
if you have to say something?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, it's and also Virginia, that was a really refreshing discussion. Having DJ'd Burning Man, I've seen all sorts of tools and work there. But it's like when I remix Birth of a Nation, one of the most fascinating things of the 20th century, and I think this goes to some of the issues you were talking about in Virginia as well. Say, for example, a lot of cameras are optimized for white skin. And there's a really good film that just came out called Coded Bias by Joy Boalam-Winnie. It's a whole crew of people. She's an associate of mine who teaches at MIT about optical bias. So those technologies of visuality, on one hand, then incorporated a basic sense of like security, use for airport recognition. If you go to China, I mean, it's incredible to see how they're using facial recognition software. But with Birth of a Nation, what was fascinating is that the use of blackface as a visual technology informed the way that the characters responded in their body language. Now, to me, what was fascinating when I remixed the film is I had to focus on how the body language would preface the narrative. So the bad guy was kind of doing something, or the hero, even though, of course, they were twisted and reversed in our time. So, when I was projecting at the Acropolis, the Greek government had asked me, why do you want to play a KKK film at the Acropolis? So, I was like, well, you guys are Greek, you got comedy, tragedy, and they're like, oh, I get it, okay. So, I mean, amusingly enough, like the way we think of this sort of theater of the everyday and these issues, that technology is a kind of an ideology. I mean, what we choose to use, the interface, even if it's a QWERTY keyboard, or even, I just wanted to show you guys something from literally 1969. And I'm sure you'll find this familiar. Here we are looking at a Brady Bunch tiles, and this is from 1969, and the Zoom call we're on is not that much different. So it's kind of shocking that, you know, the interface of that era, you know, and that was a very popular film, and it set the tone for this whole idea of the white American family, sort of nuclear family, post World War II, middle class. You know, so these are all things that DJ culture, amusingly enough, if you look at the destruction of the South Bronx because the Cross Bronx Expressway, there was a whole situation where people had to recreate social spaces. There's a really good book by Trisha Rose called Black Noise, where she talks about the urban landscape and trauma. And Virginia, this might be something that, you know, people have been saying that the actual city itself during the pandemic magnified and then created all sorts of different anxieties, which I found, it's an interesting premise. I'm not sure of the data on it, but it's an interesting premise. So anyway, just really refreshing to hear you guys' conversation. I'm kind of a respondent here, so I'm just going to dip out, but I definitely have been really enjoying the back and forth here. So, yeah.
So no, I think Dave, actually, Paul, I wanted to ask David, I mean, we have a philosopher here. We really are covering the spectrum here in a way. And I think Karen's question is relevant to, you know, the discussion, that the comments you also made, but also David, I'm wondering how you, you relate to this issues raised here, if, you know, and connecting it to, you know, the questions of AI that have been raised so far, I mean, on the Q&A as well. You know, if you would like to elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, you know, I wonder if we can maybe even focus the question in that direction, because I don't want to repeat everything that Paul just said and Anne just said in response, because I think they already said a great deal that you would relate also to artificial intelligence. I think the important thing about looking at the role that these more creative machines play in the process, or could play in the process, is that a lot of these issues are just being amped up, right, with regards to what the machine brings to the conversation and collaboration, because we're now moving away from the machine being recognized as just a tool. It's now becoming a kind of agent of its own kind. Mm-hmm. And that creates some new terrain. And I think what Anne was saying before about not just using this to reproduce what we've always done before, which would be a kind of infinite sort of infinity, like a bad infinity, as Hegel calls it, but rather what new possibilities are opened up as a result of these new collaborators. And I think that's where the really interesting innovations come from. If we're just using it, and I think one of the attendees today was saying, you know, just making a new Nirvana song that sounds like an old Nirvana song, isn't that really interesting? It's true, it's not. It shows you what's possible, but it's pattern recognition and then reproduction. The question happens, or the interest happens, when repetition moves in the Deleuzian direction, when the repetition is pushed to such an extreme that it creates something that isn't just a retread of the past, but becomes a new innovation that opens up new possibilities for the future. And I think that's what we're looking at. And Remix has done that in the past couple decades. And I think one of the ways in which we've valued Remix and Remix studies is for that very fact, that it is opening up these new avenues of inquiry and possibility. And I think creative machines and computational creativity is kind of the next iteration of that as we, you know, begin to move forward in that direction.
So how would you, if I could open it up for all three of you here, now, since you just responded, just maybe you can take turns. How do you see this potential of the machine having agency in ways unprecedented before? You can take turns at this question in your areas. Like, for example, for Paul, Paul is actually dealing with artificial intelligence very directly to create stuff, right? So we have hands-on. I mean, I think Virginia and Anne and David, we all have, we dabble with the stuff directly as well. But Paul has the music deeply. Virginia, you have a direct connection with film itself as a you know, as your field of research, and then and in terms of design and long-term commitment to DH. I mean, how do you see, you know, this sense of agency that David mentions playing a role in your in relationship to your, you know, kind of like you see for in the future in your, what's at stake in terms of that? in the field that you're focusing on, let's say. Maybe Anne wants to go first.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think it's what, David had identified earlier, that it's, reconfiguring, who's doing what and how. The question is, what does that reconfiguration look like and who's in service to whom? The idea of librarians becoming sort of, performing the tasks that Amazon workers sadly are, pressured to do, picking, on shelves, that if librarians are now pickers instead of, incredible thinkers, and that's a problem. That's not what's happening across the board. That's kind of an extreme example, but I guess it just depends on what work is relegated to whom, and what that interaction with the technologies is like. Yeah.
But wouldn't that, just to follow up a little bit on that, wouldn't that be the same challenge that, let's say, the courts are having now when they automate decision making as to this kind of sentences they'll pass, right? Like how would you reconfigure that to be fair for the future of the library, or how libraries operate, for example? What would you, how do you balance that?
Well, who's the decision maker, right? I mean, even, all of these systems tend to come back to a human who has to make a judgment call based on what's put in front of them. And so, where that lands, I guess, of course, it's definitely incredibly problematic when you're automating decision making.
This is,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, that's all. Yeah.
So this is kind of the same question that goes back to when Lyotard wrote Postmodern Condition. Frederick Jameson wrote the foreword. He was very critical of the book, and he asked the question there when Lyotard is evaluating computing, right, and future computers, and he actually foresaw that we professors and educators become more like facilitators. And Jameson said that the key issue that the book did not deal with is who's going to be making these decisions, right? So we are now in that situation. As people have dismissed that book, that question lingers. And actually, that question was posed by Frederick Jameson. So in that regard, like, how would you, do you see the same situation in terms of filmmaking or cinema, or the language of the relationship of the media itself, Virginia, in this regard?
Well, I think a couple of things. I'm currently working on a project. I'm lucky to have colleagues too who, like Scott Fisher, who kind of created one of the first VR glove, and did a lot of work at MIT. So we're working on a project to help make the AI, or to make machine learning and data-driven work accessible as another actor in a collaborative group, that we're trying to create workflows for non-studio driven filmmaking to democratize the media landscape in some ways. So that's one project. And I know the algorithms are completely problematic, and I think for the common person, and even for someone pretty steeped in the digital, it feels like something that is you can't quite weigh in on, or you can't impact in many ways. I mean, I have also a networked supercomputing project, and of course my coding skills atrophy, because when you're working with someone who has a PhD in in computer vision, you kind of take the back seat. But I will say this, I think it's hugely important for artists and humanities people to be involved. I think while technologists imagine what could be, we imagine what should be. And so I think that just literacy around the media that is taking place, literacy around the ways in which algorithms are kind of running our world, and then a huge amount of involvement or weighing in, even in places that we don't necessarily feel our expertise is sometimes even valued. But I think I think we still have to be very present and part of that conversation.
You know, actually, hey, Eduardo, I just wanted to riff on what Virginia was saying as well. And also David, I mean, in this time of stuff like NFTs and cryptocurrencies, and then above all, how people perceive market forces working. I mean, there's a tremendous economic transition from inequality and other issues that undergirds the digital economy at every level at the moment, especially the pandemic has exacerbated that. But what's also interesting is like remixing implies an irreverence for the original. And I think that right now, given the context that we're here, everyone's been talking about the sort of the Great Reset, the economics of sort of a data-driven society, where we're looking at how people in the creative economy are transitioning out of that 20th century notion of the physical production of goods and the economies that undergirded that to now the digital production of the creative economy, or how people are thinking about all of these etherealized and ephemeralized situations. It's fascinating because the African-American relationship to America over the last century, one could argue, has been one of remix of these sort of European foundations based in, you know, the Enlightenment, remixing the dust of the Enlightenment, versus on the other hand, like the exclusion from being human in the US Constitution, for example, we're considered a fraction of a human being. So it's really intriguing that remixing comes out of this sort of urban context of how people said, look, I'm going to play this record however I want, or I'm going to take this painting and chop it in half or do whatever. And if you start to think about the way kids are now repurposing everything, I don't know if you guys followed the scandal of GameStop, where on these Reddit boards, people were remixing the actual stocks, and then they called it stonk instead of stock. I mean, kids will play, you know, that's, but it's always this sort of irreverence at the heart of the dialogue. And so the Western model of like people like Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, you know, orchestras are still playing note for note their exact compositions. And centuries later, even though those guys copied other people, and one could argue Bach appropriated motifs, Mozart appropriated folk music, and so on and so on. So that there is no original, but the West kind of created this false dichotomy between authenticity and notions of authority. You know, who can determine the authentic and authoritative document or financial? I mean, even currency is fiat, what you call fiat currency. They decide how much money is worth, you know, and so on and so on. So that remix kind of is an epistemological and also ontological foundation, a sort of critique of the modern fictions of our society. I mean, in fact, my book that I'm currently working on is called Digital Fictions, The Future of Storytelling. And I usually publish with MIT, but my next book's with Duke University Press. And I've just been fascinated with how these sort of algorithms and recommendation engines and computational propaganda and other kinds of narratives have been used with devastating effect over the last several years to create alternative economies, everything from alternative facts to chatbots that are right-wing lunatics to, you know, every chapter I investigate a different phenomena of basically algorithmic and computational propaganda and things like that. But that's probably a different book and a different topic, but it's still a remix.
It's so related.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic. Like as I hear everybody, I have 100 questions that I could just start asking myself, but I would like to remind everybody participating, the attendees, that you're welcome to ask questions either through a chat, or if you want to join us as Karen has, you can also just say something and participate. Go ahead, Virginia. Yes.
Can I just weigh in? Thanks, Paul. That I love that the irreverence for the original, and that's what I've always said. It's always been my problem being in a cinema school and having no reverence for. I'm not a cinephile, you know. I just see it as one more way, and so I get these students, especially these graduate students, and they're scared to play with the footage. And I'm like, just, you know, stretch it, squash it, you know, do all those things. And I think it's so key because the field of representation is so important. Hollywood's done a shit job, frankly. And, you know, if we don't exercise our fair use, if we don't write with the language of images, then we make it so Hollywood dictates who can speak and who is silent. So I just wanted to mention that. I'm so glad you mentioned that, Paul.
No, but just think about on YouTube, there's artificial intelligence combing through authentic content. For example, if you post a video that has unapproved materials, your video will be taken down. And that goes deeper down the rabbit hole. I mean, there's all sorts of, agents. I mean, I'm a huge fan of William Gibson. His new book is called Agent, and he kind of does a series of things around that. But, these are very, who decides what will be policed? And there's even, algorithms, of course, for policing, algorithms for your profile on whatever platform you're on. I'm sure Zoom is building a profile of us now, but all of which, can be hacked and remixed. I mean, the hacker aesthetic and the remix aesthetic are just two sides of the same strange currency,
Yeah, I think you're right. And I wanted to ask everybody here, David, maybe you want to jump in first since you haven't said anything recently, but this issue of, actually I'm asking you because you mentioned earlier, Andrew, who's my colleague, asked you this question about basically kind of like being a gimmick, this kind of machine learning, being able to compose. And I'm just wondering, I mean, like, Paul will have something to say about this because Paul is using the technology to compose as well. And so, what is creativity? I mean, this is going to redefine creativity. I mean, this is for all four of you, really. But how is creativity itself being redefined? This is kind of like my long-term question, to be honest, in my research. So I'm really intrigued what you guys think about this. I mean, you guys are at the forefront of this in many ways. So, David, would you elaborate a little bit more? Like, why is it not just a gimmick? What would you say?
So I'll answer your question in a second. I want to respond to what Paul said because I think that was really interesting and important. A lot of these technologies are produced by corporations and individuals and organizations with a specific purpose for the technology. You think of the turntable, it was originally produced in order to play commodified music, but it was repurposed by users, right? Grandmaster Flash and others decided to turn it into a production tool as opposed to a distribution tool. And I think that's the task before artists right now with the algorithm. Don't just let the algorithm sort your content on YouTube and make recommendations. Repurpose the algorithm, repurpose the machine learning, deep learning, recurrent neural networks to do more than just tell you what you should be consuming. Use them to make new and original ideas come to life in ways that collaborate with human artists in ways we haven't seen before. So the tools, it's about power. Who has the tool, who gets to use the tool, and where do they use that tool to interfere or interact with their culture at their specific time? And I think that's the real challenge before all of us right now. But to the question of creativity, I think we've seen this already with remix studies, that remix is not something that causes a change in the future of the way we look at creativity. It reverberates forwards and backwards, right? The event of remix causes us not only to think about where things go from here, but it also causes us to look all the way back to the pre-modern period, to look at Homer as an early remixer, right? And as a collaborative artist, taking samples from other artists and recombining them to create the Homeric lyric poems that were delivered during that period of time. So I think what is really interesting about all of these innovations and all these interventions is that they have repercussions that not only help us what happens next with computational creativity and algorithms, but also what has happened previously. Because we all know the author is a construct of the modern era. And now remix allows us to rethink that construct and come up with new ways of deciding and determining who has the authority to create art and artistry and be able to stamp something as original versus derivative. I mean, these are power struggles, and these power struggles are political, these power struggles are cultural, but they're also philosophical. And I think we have to look at the full range of repercussions as they move forward and backwards in time.
So I just got an interesting question. I'll follow up, but maybe Paul, you're using the technology to directly create. I mean, you're like a daily. You do this on the beat, so to speak. Not upon music, but you get up every morning and this is what you do, right? You breathe and this is your living. So would you like to reflect on the?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a very refreshing conversation because I actually have been feeling like the Trump era and the way computational propaganda was used to leverage right-wing perspectives and then amplify and magnify them was really fascinating. The left didn't have the tools. And then, of course, we've now been seeing voter suppression and all these other issues. It's deeply political. There's no question about it that, even this morning, the Facebook oversight board deplatforming Trump, the January 6th insurrection was one of the first algorithmic insurrections. Most of the people were there. They don't know who Q is. They don't know who is posting this stuff. And they're taking Q drops and all sorts of weird linguistic tropes and then making crazy, mythologies out of it, literally fictions out of thin air. So they're storytellers. And so that narrative frame of reference that I think Dave was talking about is that stories are always a tension between the politics of perception and how people review those become all sorts of tools. I mean, Homer, on one hand, was a poet, but on the other hand, Athenian democracy and other issues that come out of those kinds of critique of orality, being able to express and convey your idea, is the foundation of our Western republic kind of approach to democracy. It's heartbreaking because people like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates, these guys are able to leverage massive amounts of copyright power and lock people out of the system. But what's fascinating is that most people are going to go then and make their own new worlds, and those worlds are going to be a lot cooler and more interesting than some corporate sterile space on the internet. So the hacker aesthetic is actually one of the most trickster. There's a very famous trickster character in West African mythology called Anansi, and I'm always interested in the trickster approach to information, because that's where the real change happens, is when people play. That playfulness and reverence I was talking about. But yeah, it's funny that Eduardo mentioned that. I'm working my book, but I just finished a new album, which is not quite finished because we're going to do an NFT of the album, long story. And it's called The Invisible Hand. And I've been fascinated with these ideas of generative music and looking at Wolfram Alpha. Stephen Wolfram has a website that's analyzed every major style of music mathematically. So hip hop is just it's a certain tempo, it's a certain beat, it's usually a minor chord. A minor chord is only a certain amount of notes, et cetera. And it's trivial to compute that. Techno has a certain rule set, like tempo, et cetera, hip hop, dubstep, you name it, most of which are trivial to compute. So once you do that, you have a field day. Next step is like generate a voice, and what kind of voice is algorithmically compelling? Like, how do you, and so people are working on that. There's certain bands in Japan that are just all digital. I'm sure maybe you guys remember the band, The Gorillas, that was a graphic design hip hop group. But in Japan, there's ones that are huge pop stars that like Toyota owns the voice of the singer, like the corporation Toyota. So I couldn't make that stuff up. Hatsune Miku, it means sound of the future in Japanese. If you Google it, Hatsune Miku, I guess I can post it, or it's a Japanese pop star that fills arenas, like huge arenas throughout Asia. But the corporation that owns the voice and owns the image has optimized it to appeal to all those different regions in East Asia. So they've done an algorithmic and computation analysis of popularity itself. So if you have that kind of computational power, you can do a huge data deep dive into everyone's taste, like Cambridge Analytica did for Facebook for Trump, or with a rock band that is algorithmically optimized to be popular, which is actually people are working right now. These are all things that I'm intrigued by. I'm in the middle of it, so I can't quite get into all of the weeds there, but it's been intriguing to talk with different artificial intelligence specialists. I'm also a judge for the Guthman Awards, which we commission each year musicians to come up with new instruments that have never existed before. And so this year we opened up to artificial intelligence to make new instruments, and the submissions for whoever wins gets $10,000. And people were just making crazy, crazy instruments. So those are hopeful. And whenever I walk around and you see a Trump flag, you're like, this person's like a broken soul, like someone carrying a Trump flag who's been just like an algorithmic zombie or something. Like they've just been, they've been monetized and reduced to a chatbot for like a Trump algorithm. Sorry to go on to the Trump thing, but I have to admit, these are dark and cynical times. But meanwhile, people are going to play, which I think is the healthiest thing, and which this conversation has made me very hopeful about the next couple of years, because someone put an algorithmic zombie in a bad infinity. There we go.
Sounds like a good. It sounds like a good fictional character for sure.
And by the way, Virginia, I think you'll find this amusing, but most of the people in the Trump administration came out of reality TV. So if you look at like most of his people, the guy who was the economic advisor, Kudlow was an idiot it was just a puppet on, his economic advice was a joke. Trump obviously is reality TV. Steve Bannon was a bad film producer. I don't know if you've ever seen any of his films, and so on and so on. So all those guys were using narrative tools that come out of a cinematic and usually reality TV approach. So we can appropriate, remix, and I'm sure you guys know Kirby Ferguson's his visual essay called "Everything Is a Remix." If you haven't seen that, it's brilliant. I'm sure Eduardo, you've included his work in other stuff too, right?
Yeah. Everybody here, I think, has. I used it in my classes. I think everybody else has, and I'm a fan of this. But we're actually running right on to the time, 2 hours. So I really want to thank everybody. I do want to ask Virginia and Anne if you would like to comment on anything we're still discussing these issues of creativity and jumping into these other areas of, for Paul, it was about, his direct relationship with, this kind of new technology but maybe you want to elaborate in your own, some reflections about that or anything else that stands out that you want to share before we move on. We end the session. Maybe Anne, you want to share anything?
I don't really have anything to contribute to this particular topic, but I do want to thank you and everybody for an amazing, stimulating conversation. It's fantastic.
Well, I thank you for being here. And Virginia, would you like to, maybe, do you have anything to add perhaps?
I don't really have anything to add, but except that, I knew that about Trump. Paul, thanks so much. I firmly think that he got elected because he was on television, and I thought a lot of humans figured that meant he was a good businessman, even all facts to the contrary. I mean, I don't know how they could have thought that, but so I do think, but I think maybe the last thing to say is that, that's when I realized how urgent the need was to continue remixing, is when the right started remixing the left. That was.
That's very interesting you bring that up, because actually a friend of ours who attended, maybe he left at this point, but David Beard did write, he wrote this collective anthology. I mean, he edited an anthology where a colleague wrote, he passed away unfortunately, but he wrote about how the right is able to remix as well. I mean, and that's a good point, because we often think of remixing as something being, progressive in a way, or, for fight, like a grassroots sort of endeavor. But, anybody can use it. And this is something that we have said repeatedly in our introductions of our own collaborations, and people are not aware of that. I think people are, but they just automatically, as the connotation is like, oh, this is about area for people to express themselves. But it really can. It's anybody can do it. I mean, it's really. I wanted to. Anybody can do it. But anyways, I wanted to just ask Owen or xtine if you want to say anything, or before we move on. Yes. All right. I think xtine.
Sorry, it took me a second I just want to say thank you. I don't want to add any extra time because we're over time, but thank you all so much. This was really, really lovely and so productive. And I just would like to voice what's in the chat from Aiden Delaney, who says, many thanks. Most engaging discussion I've heard on Zoom since the start of this move to Zoom. So that's pretty big. Thank you all.
Thank you. Owen, you want to say anything?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody as well. It's been fascinating to hear all of you, especially after, we've only been reading and sending emails back and forth and editing your work, but to actually hear it from your voice in person, it really brings your ideas to life, I think. So it's been a privilege to hear you speak today. Thank you very much. It really
has been a privilege for me as well. I want to say that this last discussion we had, Paul and I, Paul contributed to a previous anthology, as you know, Keywords in Remix Studies. And in that anthology, he discussed versioning, and Trump shows up inevitably there. So this guy has been with us for a while. And I was just, I'm going to say that in the introduction, we also acknowledge the reality in which this was published. So just now that we have moved out of it into this sort of new administration, just rereading it when I first got it made me realize, wow, this is going to read it's going to mark a moment in history 10 years from now. And I think it's going to be, historians will look at this moment and all the writing and publishings that happened during this period as a moment of trauma or something, like for whichever way you stand, I think everybody's really polarized, right? So, whatever ideology you endorse, I think it's just as traumatic for people who are against Trump as well as for Trump. I mean, I think everybody's really just trying to make sense of the changes and the issues of minorities shifting, the minority group shifting, not just in the US, but all over the world. It's really a challenge for ideologies that have been standing for thousands of years, really, to a large degree. So we're really living in historical times. And I want to just thank Tara and Bill. Bill had to leave, but I want to thank ADRI again for doing this. And I really hope that we can have a few more in the future. It does take an effort, and I appreciate everybody for putting in the time. And I think it will be archived so it can be shared later, and hopefully people will find it worthwhile for future reference. So everybody here provided such an insightful set of ideas that I think it was worth it. So thank you again. So with that, I'll say I'll be in touch through email and all that good stuff. So thank you guys. Thank you so
Thanks
much.
again, and apologies.
All right. Thanks, y'all. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.